Hello and welcome. My name is Paul Bazanti and I serve as the president of the Chamber of Commerce Brantford-Brant and as your moderator for this event. Our chamber is pleased to be the community producer of this program in partnership with Rogers TV. Today's debate features candidates running for mayor of the city of Brantford. Our community is facing a number of challenges and issues, and to that point, leadership will be a key to ensuring our future prosperity. I congratulate all the candidates on their continued commitment to our community, and we look forward to an interesting evening. The candidates running for the mayor of Brantford are Kevin Davis, Ryan Smith, John Turmel, and Dave Robell. Joining me this evening, our panelist is Greg Evans, a member of the Chamber of Commerce Advocacy Committee. Our timer this evening is Andy Straisfeld. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their opening remarks. The order of speaking was determined by random draw. The panelists will alternate posing questions. Each candidate will then have the opportunity to respond to each question with a 2-minute time limit being imposed. In the instance of a candidate making a personal reference to a specific other candidate, that candidate will be allowed a 30-second rebuttal. Each candidate will then be allowed 1 minute for a closing statement, and the speaking order will be reverse of the opening remarks. The timekeeper will indicate when the candidates have 15 seconds remaining to speak and when they have reached their maximum time allowed. In the case of a challenge, the decision of the moderator will be final. I would ask that the candidates adhere to the agreed upon format and exercise professional decorum throughout the debate. Thank you. And we will begin with the candidates' opening remarks. The first candidate to speak will be Dave Robell.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Dave Robell. Yes, the W is silent, and like in high school, I'm always at the bottom of the list, but I get to be today's first speaker. Brantford has been our family home for 4 generations. I grew up in Brantford. I went to school in Brantford. I've played sports here. I've apprenticed here. Now, I'm a well-seasoned carpenter, unlike my dear friend Richard Carpenter. I work and operate a small business in Brantford. I've been a volunteer, a mentor, and a college professor. Sherry and I have raised our family here. I've been a candidate in previous elections, and I was elected 3 times to serve as a Ward 4 councillor alongside Richard Carpenter. As a tradesman, municipal leader, educator, and volunteer, I understand the diverse needs of our community. Democracy, teamwork, honesty, and integrity are key to my leadership style. Everything I have done to this point was to prepare me for the job of a lifetime, to be the very best mayor for you and the city of Brantford. Join me for the next 4 years as we work together to rebuild the trust, the transparency, and the honesty that has been lacking with our current political culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robell. Mr. Turmel, you're next.
Well, had I been elected 4 years ago, there would have been no vax mandate, no forced injections. How can I say that? Well, in early 2000, the Toronto Star published a story that said, WHO announces that the COVID 3.4% death rate for case fatality rate, hospitalized, was higher than the flu's 0.1% infection fatality rate. They compared apple to orange to scare people by a factor of 100. So I brought the information to a federal court. I said, look, they compared CFR to IFR to be off by a factor of 100. This is a false alarm. And it was dismissed, thrown out. Doesn't matter. I'm still fighting over this. I'm trying to get out the message that WHO exaggerated the threat by a factor of 100 to scare you into lockdowns, house arrest, and then to force you to take the jab because you wanted to get out of lockdowns. Now, is the jab any good? You heard safe and effective how many times? Well, effective. We know it wasn't effective because you can still get it, you can still transmit it. Safe. Well, we're 85% Canadians vaccinated. And if 85% of the deaths were among the vaccinated, I'd expect that. 85%, 15. If it was less than 85%, I'd say, okay, the vax worked a bit. And if it was way low, then the vax really worked. But 92% of deaths are among the 85% vaxxed. Do you understand what that means? Not only does it not work, it hurts. Now, the U.S. Army They have good statistics, medical statistics, and they examined their records and they found that 80% of pregnant women who got the shot had miscarriages. Okay? So if you got the shot, you're probably not going to have any grandchildren. The adverse effects are multiple, but you're not going to see it on the mainstream news brought to you by Pfizer. You're going to see it only in the underground news sites. Gateway Pundit, Zero Hedge, Dr. Mercola, Stu Peters.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to pick that up later. Thank you. Mr. Davis, your turn.
Yes, just a second. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to thank the Brantford Regional Chamber of Commerce for organizing this debate. I'd also like to congratulate the other candidates for mayor and council. It's a big commitment to run for office, but we do it because we want to make Brantford the best it can be. When I was elected 4 years ago, my goal was to bring a strong foundation for our city and make it ready for tomorrow. Then came the COVID pandemic. We put a lot of time and energy into keeping people safe and healthy. Yet despite that, we've made tremendous progress. By collaborating with council, city staff, neighboring municipalities, senior levels of government, community groups, and people of Brantford, we've taken some big steps forward. We've attracted major new employers, including Heritage Hockey Sticks, Hershey Chocolate, Upfield and Costco, chosen Brantford as a place to grow. We're opening the land north of Powerline Road to development where we'll eventually see 20,000 jobs and 50,000 people. New housing is being built across the city, much of it on land that has sat vacant and unused for many years. Right now, we're building affordable housing for our more vulnerable residents with hundreds more units coming. We're tackling substance abuse with programs to get substance users off the street. We're doing more to protect your family by adding police officers, paramedics, and firefighters. We're building new parks and improving existing ones. And finally, we are committed to rebuilding the Brantford General Hospital. Still, as far as we've come, there's more to do. We must keep pressing these issues and addressing new ones so Brantford continues to be the best place it can be to live, work, raise a family, and grow a business. I look forward to discussing my record and my plans with you in more detail later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. And Mr. Smith, finally with you.
I don't have a set opening statement, and please forgive my stutter. My name is Ryan Smith. I have been known as Brantford Batman for about 7 years now. I've done everything I could to work with as many charity groups and reach as many people in Brantford as possible. That has allowed me ample time to reach every corner, every economic level, every family lifestyle possible. And I've heard many different complaints and many different issues raised. Because of that, I've decided to take the next step and actually run for office. I have very little to almost no political background, but that doesn't, in my opinion, eliminate me from running. The job itself can be learned. The personality and the attitude going into it is what is much more difficult to learn and much more difficult to change. Again, forgive my stutter. Going forward, I want to obviously focus on taking care of the people we already have, much more than focusing on developing and growing bigger than what we already have and already struggle to help and support and deal with now. Again, as Mr. Davis said, I would like to look forward to the future and discussing my plans in much more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, we offer our congratulations to the candidates and applaud their continued commitment to our community. We will begin with question 1, and I'll ask Greg Evans of the Chamber of Commerce to begin.
Candidates, on the topic of transportation, the signature advocacy priority of the Chamber of Commerce Brantford-Brant throughout our history is the improvement of transportation infrastructure in the region. What are the key infrastructure projects you will commit to leading as mayor?
And Mr. Turmel, we'll begin with you. You have 2 minutes.
I would set up a Let's local employment trading software, Time Bank, which allows the poor people and unemployed people to log on, for instance, what nights they can double duty babysit each other's kids and pay each other with 1-hour bills. Then the mechanic can take 3 hours per hour in his shop. And the dentist can take 6 hours per hour in his chair, and you end up with a support group around a bunch of broke people. So I think that is the first thing we can do, is to get everybody connected into a Let's database so that they're able to use these time-based currency credits to pay each other, to help each other, without needing to call on government all the time. So that's basically it. It's a do-it-yourself money system, and it's spread all over the world since 1984. I financed the software. I'm very proud of it. Got invited to the United Nations in 2000 Millennium Assembly to do the speech on the global financial system of the future, and they passed a resolution for an alternative time-based currency. So when you can use time as your collateral, you are going to be safe.
Thank you, Mr. Turmel. Mr. Davis, your turn, and reminder, the topic is transportation and infrastructure projects.
Thank you. In 2018, we put up a campaign billboard that said, if I were mayor, you'd be home by now. And that was about the traffic problems for people in West Brant, the difficulty they had in getting to work, shopping, moving to the 403 to commute either east or west. And, you know, I see it every day from my office. It's clearly getting worse. And back in the 1980s, the planned solution was the Oak Park Road extension, connecting Colburn Street West to Highway 403 through the old Oak Park Road. And the city bought most of the property, but since then, little has been done. So our council started an environmental assessment to determine the feasibility of that particular route. The study raised a lot of red flags, such as sensitive environmental areas, archaeological issues, the high cost of the bridge, and the fact that a whole neighborhood had grown up around the route that did not want it, not to mention there being a cemetery that didn't exist in the 1980s. So council decided not to proceed further with that project. I supported that decision. We also ruled out completing the Brantford Southern Access Route because much of it passes across the Six Nations glebe property belonging to Six Nations, and they made it clear they were not interested, understandably, in selling or leasing their land. So we had to decide, well, we know what we're not going to do, then the issue was, what are we going to do next? And so traffic experts told us improve what we have, doubling up the Veterans Memorial, fixing the pinch point at Clarence and Colburn and Dalhousie, and trying to improve traffic flow on Brant Ave. But you know what? We still have to do more for West Brant. And what we're looking at now is a promising option is working with the County of Brant to work on regional transportation planning. The county is already interested in this, and I think this would be very beneficial, focusing on the Rest Acres Road and Colburn Street West, proving the links from here to Cambridge and Waterloo, and also we've looked at a transit link, and we're petitioning the province to establish a GO transit link between the two cities.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Smith, same question to you, transportation and infrastructure.
I think the question basically speaks for itself. We have to focus on the transportation we already have. We shouldn't be worried about adding in new roads, adding or changing anything that we have now. If we have pinch points, change the lights, upgrade the bus system. We definitely need to upgrade the bus system. That's one of the issues I hear many times, is that the buses run at odd times. They don't reach certain areas. They end too early. But buses, taxis, public transportation is a big issue currently. We have to focus on, again, as I've stated, and I will likely state many times tonight, that we have to focus on the people we have in town now and not worrying too much about the 50,000 people or 100,000 people that we want to come in the next 5 to 10 years. We want to be able to reach the areas of the city that we aren't reaching safely and quickly and efficiently right now. My focus, if and when I am elected, would be to focus on, again, the public transportation, the access to the public transportation, the cost of the transportation and the passes themselves, and reaching all those that actually need it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Robell, same question, back to you.
Great, thank you very much. Is Brantford better off today than we were 4 years ago? We are ranked 29 out of 32 in the Democracy Index. We are ranked somewhere in the top 100 cities for high crime stats. We didn't even rank in the top 150 livable communities. The last 4 years of our affordable housing wait list has increased from 650 to 1,700 families. We have growing financial needs. Housing affordable, we're $500 million plus. Infrastructure projects for Brant Ave and the downtown core, $170 million plus. Projected $87 million for the Oak Park Road Expressway, an option that is deferred until after this election, an option I do not support. And in light of the question, County Road 18 is an alternative ring road solution that has been available for this community to adjust and adapt for more than a decade. The state of our downtown with the loss of businesses, the increase of homelessness, mental health, drugs, and addictions, the lack of community engagement, the loss of a 97-year-old valued community green space, the chilling effect of a $75 million lawsuit against 6 residents who peacefully protested against the decision to sell Airedale, all of which is funded by your tax dollars, over $10 million of legal costs spent during the term of this council, funeral service cut for funding for the most vulnerable in their families who have lost a loved one and can't afford the dignity of a burial service. And that's the short list. Brantford deserves better. You deserve better. We have an opportunity to turn this trend around. Follow me on Dave Robell for mayor, robell.ca. On October 24th, elect me, Dave Robell, for your mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robell. There were a number of references to previous council and deferrals. I'll offer Mr. Davis a 30-second rebuttal to some of those comments.
Right. Well, there was a lot in that to respond to, but taking the focus of this particular question, which is transportation, you know, there is more that we can do and we have to do, and it's not just West Brant. It's also other areas of the city, and in particular the transit system. We have to review the whole transit system. I believe there's a need for east-west routes in the north end with the expansion that's happening up there, and with the growth in the employment that'll be taking place just east.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We'll move on to our next question. And this gets into some of those topics that you were talking about. The Brantford Municipal Airport is an interesting municipal asset. It's located in the county, but it's managed by the Airport Commission for the city. There are a number of businesses and organizations that rely on each other and the operations of the airport itself to serve our region. How can the city support the business and education communities that use the airport, while at the same time capitalizing on the opportunities available at the site? And as a secondary note there, would you support the airport as a driver for economic development in the community? And we'll start with you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Yes, the airport is an important component of our economic development and our attractiveness to businesses and individuals that are already here in Brantford and are considering coming here. For example, we have a number of industries at the airport, 130 jobs. We have the air ambulance coming in and out of the airport regularly. We have the W. Ross McDonald School, 30 students coming in and out of the airport each week. We also have about 100 different businesses that actually use the airport on a regular basis, either to bring in staff, bring in customers, or bring in emergency shipments of parts they need to continue their lines, their productivity lines. So, but we recognize at Council this year that there's a need to improve the airport so that it provides a better economic driver for both this city and also for this region. And for that reason, there is a visioning study that's about to commence this fall with a report to the new Council. And what it'll tell us is what it is we need to do to make the airport work better for us, and also how it can better fit into the aviation world as it's changed over the last 2 decades. You know, for example, we have 2 flying schools out there, one of which has been out there almost 100 years and produces pilots for the armed forces, for many of the commercial airlines. Many people in Brantford have had their career in aviation start at the Brantford Airport. So it's been underutilized in some degree. It hasn't had much attention in the last decade. It's time we paid some attention to the airport and make it a much more useful, productive asset for this city, for this region. I know we can do it, and I'm actually quite excited by the possibilities that we have in our airport.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, same question on the airport.
Honestly, as much as I hate to admit it, I haven't had too much opportunity to look into the way the airport's running now. It was not a big key aspect of what I want to do if elected. But from what I've personally seen and from what I've heard, the very little that I've heard, I do have to agree that it is severely underutilized and severely underfunded for the growth that the city seems to want. I definitely have to agree with Mr. Davis that it has to be revamped, it has to be looked at to find the best way to actually make it more accessible to those that don't even necessarily know it's there. It took me almost 5 years of living here before I even realized there was an airport in Brantford. And I only found out about that because of the air show. So it's definitely not, to me, with all due respect to all those that work there and use it, it's not a high priority for me, but it is definitely something that I would want to look into in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robell on the airport.
Thank you very much. I'm going to encourage the viewers to go to the Dave Robell for Where website at robell.ca. Click on the Brantford Future tab, and with your help, I've identified a growing list of goals and objectives to address in the next 4 years. Before we can move forward in any capacity, even answering the questions that are here tonight, we need to rebuild the trust within our political culture. Accountability is a very good place to start. I strongly believe in the fundamentals of democracy, openness, and transparency. Are you aware that Brantford was ranked 29th out of 32 cities on the Democracy Index? How has our community been impacted by that lack of transparency and democracy? Allow me to share with you. Now that I am about to, now I think about it, we will need 2/3 of a vote for his motion to be heard without prior notice of motion. It reduces the risk, but I still think we have to start lobbying this weekend and then mount a social media campaign to get your case out before the community, before Richard gains too much support and public sympathy. Followed by, are we still meeting at 3:30 and where? I see Carpenter's posts are getting small traction. Unless Carpenter's post begins to take off, it may be better to sit in the weeds and ambush him on Tuesday. Now there's another post that also comes with regards to Councillor Antosky and her position with regards to Airedale. And again, there's a plot to go after her and belittle her and shame her. I am also considering whether at some point to throw down the stake, come out guns blazing and supporting Jan, and publicly stating that I will consider an outcome of a vote, a confidence motion, re my leadership, and if it fails, I will resign and not run in the subsequent by-election. I strongly feel about this, and if I pull that trigger, I will resign. It's a game of high-stakes poker. I'm going to continue throughout the other questions until I've had an opportunity to identify the problems that we're running through in this community.
Sorry, that's time, and I'll remind Mr. Turmel that the question that we're trying to address here is the airport as a municipal asset and a driver for economic development.
Yes. Well, before I get there, I'm going to finish the point about infrastructure and transportation that I didn't complete last time, okay, that you mentioned. Yes, there are many bad things about the transportation. For instance, you're coming up West Street, you want to turn left on Charing Cross, you got an extended green, but the people coming on Charing Cross who want to get on West don't have an extended, they don't have an advanced green. So you have many situations in town where one way has an advanced and the other way doesn't have an extended. You should be matched. No one's crossing the street if they're turning left, and no one will be crossing the street if you can turn right. So I've been going through there without on the red light, waiting for the first cop to stop me so I can tell a judge, hey, that's stupid that they can be turning left on an extended and I can't turn right on an advanced. So this is all over the city, St. Paul at Brant, everywhere. You got these inefficiencies that could easily be fixed by changing the lights. Number two, I agree. We should try hard to make things better for the airport. Completely agree with the other candidates. We should try and make things better.
Thank you. I think we'll move on from there to the next question. Greg?
Residents and businesses in Brantford-Brant move between the city and the county and other municipalities surrounding the city without consideration about the ownership of the roads. However, significant gaps remain in the roads and in public transportation to employment lands and to surrounding communities. Will you commit to developing a regional transportation master plan during the next term of council, working with our neighbors and the province to plan for accessible transportation options, including improving GO and VIA?
And before I throw it over to you, Mr. Smith, on this one, I want to remind the candidates to please stick to the subject at hand. I will begin to curtail your responses if you are going off subject. So, on regional transportation, Mr. Smith, over to you.
Okay, my apologies. My apologies. Yes, I would absolutely love to have a main transportation master plan for not only reaching the new developments, not only reaching the outskirts of the city, but also to help improve the transportation and the access to basically everywhere in the city. There are a lot of choke points. There are a lot of questionable points, as Mr. Turmel just brought up, that could definitely do with some revision. But yeah, basically in short, yes, I would love to have a transportation master plan, if done properly and efficiently, to reach those needed in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Mr. Robell.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the cautionary warning that I've received, but I'm going to continue on my direction because I think it's appropriate that the public know and have an opportunity to understand the background of what's transpired over the last 4 years. And yes, with regards to the question, I do agree with a master transportation plan, but it's going to be an inclusive one that has to address 6 nations, county council, and city council. It must also engage the public. And if we're going to engage the public, then we need to also respect the public. More importantly, I'm not sure that I would want to continue to lead a community that gives priority to catering to the interest of a small group. Now, this is over Airedale. There are 8,000 signatures.
Mr. Robell, the question is on regional transportation.
I'm coming back to it, please.
We will have ample opportunity to talk about housing and community issues related to that.
There are 8,000 signatures. That's a large majority of crowd. There are also hundreds of thousands or hundreds of signatures opposing the OPR. These are not small groups. And the public needs to know that when you're going to represent the community, even in transportation master plans, you need to do it openly, honestly, and in a democratic process. Now, we have 2 choices. According to these emails that are brought out, you can launch on a full social media campaign with your motion, or we can start lobbying behind the scenes starting tomorrow. I would suggest lobbying with Greg Martin and Dan. Then we meet with Joshua and Brian, and when we get those 4 to come our way, we move on to the Johns.
Mr. Robell,
now, if we're
the
going
question is not about these matters.
I understand
it
what
is
you're
about
asking.
Transportation master planning.
But if you're going to lobby council behind closed doors, I think it's appropriate that we need to be able to do that in an open and public format. And that includes transportation master plans that encompass the ring road that goes around from Garden Avenue to County Road 18 and crosses up to Rest Acres Road. This has been something that I've been talking about for more than 2 elections. In fact, 2014, I brought it as an issue in 2018. This council overlooked that opportunity in building those relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turmel.
Yes, who wouldn't agree with a master plan to improve things? But I want to point out that the buses are snarled by the same inefficiencies in our lights and our unsynchronized lights as we are. So if we want better buses and better transit and more effective transit, let's fix the lights for the buses too.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, and timekeeper, he can have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to address some of the comments made towards him.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not here to tear other people down. I'm here to talk about what we have to do to move Brantford forward into the future. And certainly transportation is one of the most important issues that this council's been dealing with and the next council will have to deal with. If I'm elected mayor, transportation, the transportation linkages in our community will be one of my top priorities. And that encompasses a couple of different areas. One, the transportation linkages between the city and the county, the city and 6 Nations, the city and Cambridge, the city and Waterloo and Guelph. We were petitioning the province this summer to develop a GO bus link between the various communities. Very difficult for one municipality to do that on its own. And there's an absolute need for a regional transportation plan. We've got roads that come out of the county, dead-ending, at the city boundary. We have roads coming out of the city, kind of dead-ending at the county boundary. The county has shown an interest in developing a regional transportation plan. It's now with staff. I'm very confident that if we look at it on a regional basis, we can help one another solve our transportation issues. At Paris, for example, there are issues there in terms of bypass. And if we can work together, I'm confident we'll be able to secure provincial funding for these transportation linkages. Also, internally, our transit system, we experienced this summer the half-hour service being lost because of staff shortages. So we know how important it is to have efficient transportation, transit service. That has definitely got to be a focus in the future. I'd like to say this about these emails. You know, they've been out for several years now. People have come to their own conclusions. You know, we've heard what Mr. Robell thinks about them, but let's look at what impartial and unbiased people looked at it and said. How about 3 judges of the Divisional Court, the most senior judges in Ontario? They looked at everything, and they considered everything. And what did they say? They said the decision to sell Arrowdale was driven by a genuine desire to serve the public interest by providing more affordable housing. Members of council were willing to listen to contrary points of view and amend their positions as a result of those contrary opinions. This is the opposite of what is meant by a closed mind. It was a tough decision. The court said it was a proper decision. The end result is good for Brantford. Hundreds of housing for those who are most vulnerable and need it, and we get a brand new park.
That's our time for the question. Thank you. We'll move on to the next category of questions in economic development. And the first question here is, the city's economic development portfolio is diverse and includes more than just traditional commercial and industrial sectors. Arts and culture, heritage, tourism, all sectors that drive economic development in the community. What would you do as mayor to enhance the city's commitment to the arts, culture, heritage, and tourism sectors? And we will begin with Mr. Robell.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to my 2 minutes and 45 seconds because my name was mentioned in the previous rebuttal. There are at least 100 of these emails that I have referenced in communication. They've been obtained by a Freedom of Information request. Now, the majority of these emails are posted and under a Freedom of Information email public group.
The question is on arts and culture, Mr. Robell.
What I read was a glimpse of the process used to decide the fate of Arrowdale. It was hidden from the public.
Mr.
It was
Robell, I'm
orchestrated.
going to stop you right there. You may have 2 minutes to address arts, culture, heritage, and tourism.
I believe the response that I'm going to give also addresses the arts, the culture, and the tourism. But in order to be able to do this with fairness to this community, we need to understand the process in which we get to it in the first place. And that's including openness and transparency. When things are already orchestrated and decided well in advance of open meetings, then we have a problem within our community. There are over 100 emails that point this point out. Now, if we're going to have things like transportation plans, and we're going to have community engagement with the county and Six Nations, then we need to be mindful and respectful. We also need to do it with openness and transparency. If we're going to have engagement with our arts and cultural community, then we need to do that with openness and transparency. In fact, we probably have one of the strongest arts and cultural communities in this area for what it all represents. I'm part of that culture. I'm a lovely, enjoyable musician who takes the time to appreciate those arts. We have our museums. We have the music industry that's here. We have the TV and television industry that comes here. We have so much to offer. But if we're not prepared to open the door politically in our public culture, then we're going to have a challenge in moving forward. Everything that we're going to discuss here today needs to have the air cleared, and we need to be able to move forward in an open and trustworthy and transparent environment. Now, I will answer your questions that you've asked me earlier today, and I will do so by posting those additional responses on my website. But I believe at this point, I thank you for the opportunity to allow me to at least clarify some of what's going on so that we can move forward in a positive direction, because I believe Brantford deserves better. I believe you deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel on arts, culture, tourism, and heritage as economic drivers.
Everything benefits from more money, okay? Now, if we set up an alternate currency system, we'll have more money, which means that people can use this alternate currency to go to the shows, can enjoy the arts. And now the people who are getting paid with some of the alternate currency get to use it for what they want to spend it all. So coming back to lack of money all the time. All problems stem from lack of money, and all problems that are based on lack of money can be fixed if we set up an alternative currency system. Easily done if you use time as your collateral with a new kind of time bank that I'm talking about. So, yes, I'd love to be able to be paid when I give accordion concerts at old folks' homes. Now I just go there to practice. But I'd love to be paid. I wish they could afford me, but they can't right now. So I'm just saying that once we do set up an official time bank for the whole city is the day everybody has more money to spend on economic development and the arts and everything else.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
Yeah, the arts, cultural, and heritage communities are an important component of our local economy and becoming ever more important, certainly over the last several decades, where the service-type industries, such as those being restaurants and theater and cultural groups, and also our great history here, it's becoming a much more important component of our local economy. We've recognized that at the city. That's why we're beginning to shift the focus slightly of the Economic Development Department from traditional economic development, such as attracting industries, that's still important, but also turning and focusing a greater focus on those areas: arts, heritage, history, culture. For example, we've entered an agreement with Laurier where the city is contributing $150,000 for the development of a small performing arts center in the downtown. And that fits nicely with the concept we have for making our downtown more vital, which is having more activity downtown, such as cultural events. It's an important component of renewing our downtown and making it and having it move forward. So absolutely, it's an ever increasing and more important part of our local economy. It deserves more attention by all levels of government, and certainly this council has begun to do that. I'm quite confident the next council will carry that through.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Same question to you, Mr. Smith, on arts and culture.
Do you mind repeating the question again, Harry?
Certainly. The question is on arts, culture, heritage, and tourism as an economic driver in the community. And what would you do to support that?
I think the arts in itself is a huge part of Brantford. We have a lot of musicians, both smaller and bigger, upcoming, open jam kind of quality artists. We have art markets. We have places like Creative Chaos Tattoo that encourages art sales, both in paintings and sculptures. We have places like Manny's and Bucks that encourage live music from not only bigger live bands, but the smaller solo artists. I think that's a huge thing that Brantford definitely needs to focus on and lean on for the future. Another thing I think we have fallen a little short on is paying attention to other cultures, other heritages, other religions, other races, and their way of life. It goes without saying that Brantford is fairly mixed in all of the above, but it also feels divided. By bringing all of those cultures and the arts of those heritages and cultures together would definitely benefit in bringing the city itself up definitely a couple of steps more than we have now. The next administration, whether it be me or anybody at this table, should definitely focus on reinforcing the live music, the live arts, and the heritage and arts of the other religions. Again, please excuse my stutter.
Thank you very much. All right, Greg, next question to you.
Candidates, the 2017 boundary adjustment brought 1,684 net hectares of land into the city's boundaries. Please outline your strategy for working with our neighbors on Six Nations and the County of Brant specifically to capitalize on the economic opportunities for these lands.
And Mr. Turmel, you get to start with this one.
Well, I got to go back to more money again. We'll give them more money if they do what we want. We'll give them more alternative currency if they do what we want. We'll pay them more for what they want. I can't think of anything else. Can you? Thank you.
Mr. Davis, same question to you.
The state of the relationship between the city and the peoples of the Six Nations and Mississauga, the Credit First Nations. One of the most significant challenges and opportunities that our city has. And this council has been taking steps to improve that important relationship. We've hired an Indigenous Affairs officer. We've been sponsoring cross-cultural events. We're assisting the Woodland Cultural Center as they develop the Residential Schools Museum. We're helping the Secretariat search for the missing children. And we're also having the staff between the elected council and the city work together much more closely. However, there's a much larger issue that remains unresolved, and it certainly will impact on the boundary lands, and that's the question of land claims. And that can only be answered by the federal and provincial governments. They have the constitutional authority and they have the financial resources to do it. There's a land claim lawsuit filed by the Six Nations in elected council in 1995. And what that is in reference to is land in the Grand River watershed where there was no surrender in the 1800s or a defective surrender. The federal government's the lead defendant. It's a national shame that this lawsuit has really lain dormant now for 27 years with no clear end in sight. The result is we're left sort of on the front line of this. It contributes to a tension between the two communities, the three communities actually, that the land claim lawsuit could resolve. So we need the federal and the provincial governments to step up to deal with this lawsuit, resolve these long outstanding historical grievances, and not simply leave us in the cold, is what they're doing now. So, also there's the opportunity for local government to work very proactively with Six Nations and New Credit to determine what it is we can do to create our own local solution to deal with some of those issues here locally. There was a resolution passed by Council in July that begins that process to discuss that with the province, to give us the tools that we need to be able to have those fruitful discussions with Six Nations, and also to have further consultation and accommodation with Six Nations, a process we're working very hard to improve.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the question one more time?
So the boundary adjustment brought in 1,684 net new hectares of land to the city's boundaries. What would your strategy be to work with our neighbors in the Six Nations and the County of Brant specifically to capitalize on this economic opportunity?
Okay. Thank you. Clearly, as Mr. Robell stated, one of the strongest things that I actually agree with him on is open and honest communication. That is not only just for Six Nations, but basically for everyone. For every decision that the city makes, big or small, it shouldn't be secretive. We have to be able to open those doors and open the dialogue to all of Six Nations to discuss exactly how it should be proceeded. Whether it's Brantford land or Six Nations land or the gray area in between, one way or another, we have to coexist and make it work. Discussion itself has, even from my opinion and from everyone, I've heard discussion with the city, with the surrounding cities, with Six Nations, has really fallen off. And COVID was to blame up to a certain point, but we still have access to live streaming. We have access to debates like tonight. So communication in general would be my biggest focus for not only the land, but for everything in general, really.
Thank you, Mr. Robell.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting question, but it also has to be prefaced with the fact that we need to be able to build trust. And that's public trust. It's very important. Once you break that type of trust, you can't glue it together and you can't repackage it and hope no one notices. There's trust between our own people here in Brantford. There's trust between the city and the county, and there's trust between the city, the county, and Six Nations and Mississauga Grand River. There are some things that we need to address before we can even get to trusting people and trusting the relationships. There's the ability to ask for a provincial inquiry into the ongoings leading up to and during the sale of process of Airedale, because this has an impact on our First Nations relationship. In addition, there's an opportunity to repeal the Muslin Council Code of Conduct because it allows all of our members of council to engage and have those conversations with council, with the county, and with Six Nations. And most important, we need to end the chilling effect of a $75 million slap lawsuit against 6 residents, which I want to remind the public, 5 of them are from Brantford, 1 of them is from Six Nations, and quite frankly, there was a newspaper article published that doesn't quite address the honesty of it, and that's, they may have settled with 1 individual, but I can assure this community that they haven't settled with the other 5 as of a week ago. especially when that article is published. Now, let's focus on the issues with regards to boundary adjustments and partnerships. If we're going to do these types of projects, this doesn't just take the province to look at it. We need to find those solutions even within ourselves. It will be great to reach out to the province. It will be great to reach out to the federal government and ask them. But unless we put our houses together and unite on a front, it becomes a very difficult challenge to take on the province and the federal government, because they are creatures of their own, they stand on their own, and they will do as they see fit. I think we have an opportunity to rebuild those relationships, especially with Mayor David Bailey, should he be reelected, because that relationship with him and that relationship to the county grows. It's the same thing with Six Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, I'll give you 30 seconds to rebut.
Yeah, you know, in the boundary discussions that took place 6 years ago, there was discussion of a lot levy that would be for the benefit of Six Nations. And it was the Wynne government that turned that down. And so I think it's time now for us to look at something like that again with Six Nations. It's time we control our own destiny, our own future, and not leave it in the hands of other levels of government. The time for important change, I think, is now, and change is difficult, but the time of delay and living in a world of obfuscation is over.
Thank you. And we'll move on to our next question. Downtown Brantford is an evolving entity, and revitalization is not a destination, but rather an ongoing process. How would you propose to work with the Downtown Brantford BIA, the Chamber of Commerce, and businesses to improve the environment for business and service in the downtown? And we'll begin our responses with you, Mr. Davis.
So we already have a template, a path for this. We struck council last year a downtown improvement task force. We met with all the stakeholders, including the BIA and including the Chamber. And we came up with a plan that we're now beginning to execute based on increasing safety and security in the downtown, making it more inclusive and supportive for those in need, and also to make the downtown more resilient and vibrant. And so what have we done? Well, in reference to safety and security, we now have the Downtown Beat Patrol on the street. We have the students that are back. We've developed a permanent mobile security team to take care of city properties. We also have CCTV cameras downtown. In respect to the issue of the legal system, that is a big problem when the officers arrest somebody, and we're advocating very strongly with Larry Brock for bail reform to deal with that. In terms of those who need supports, there's a number of initiatives such as a hygiene station, a snack cart at the Grand River Community Health Center, and also a safe supply project. We've done with increased coordination of various social service programs. We're working with Laurier very closely and the Laurier students to make the downtown more vital, more prosperous, and more meaningful for the students. And certainly the BIA and the Chamber of Commerce have been a big part of that process. Also looking longer term to make our downtown more vital is the fact that the water and the sewer pipes are 100 years old downtown below Dalhousie and Colborne. Council recently made a decision to spend $25 million over the next 5 years to change those pipes, upgrade them so we can have the kind of density apartment buildings that we need downtown, because part of the solution in the downtown is, of course, having more people live downtown, but if we can't build the buildings because the superstructure, the infrastructure is not there, that won't work. And also, as we mentioned previously, the arts and cultural aspect is exceedingly important to make our downtown more resilient.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, same question to you.
We've all noticed that years ago, back when the Silent Hill movie came out, downtown was, for lack of a better word, a mess. Over the years, shortly after that, it was revamped. We got the YMCA, we got Harmony Square, basically everything was rebuilt, and it lasted very, very long time. And it was beautiful, people were happy, people were shopping, people were able to live in that area and be happy in that area again. Downtown is definitely a big part of Brantford. It's, for all intents and purposes, the heart of the city for most of our events. We have many Harmony Square events there, which brings many, many people. The problem is, if we can't afford to live in those areas and we can't afford to shop in those areas, and COVID being a big problem to stop that from being achievable, we have to focus on not necessarily revamping the buildings again, because you can only repaint it so many times. It doesn't fix the problem, it just hides it. We have to find ways to make housing cheaper, make rent and utilities cheaper in those areas, or at least much more affordable. Bring more people to the areas that are actually shopping, and not just for, you know, the free splash pad or the free movies. As great as those events are, they don't necessarily encourage the downtown area to prosper as it should. One of my goals will be a huge support local campaign. It's been stated by many people in the past. Many politicians everywhere are always saying support local. It never really works out. And I know I sound exactly the same saying so, but I do fully intend on making support local a huge aspect of my my campaign and going forward. Many of the places downtown are local businesses, so that will definitely help improve downtown by itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robell on the downtown.
Thank you very much. I think this is one of those questions that requires a compassionate and sensitive response. Well, we have the BIA and the Chamber of Commerce who've done a tremendous amount of work in our community. We've had the relocation of the City Hall. We have agencies downtown. We've now, as mentioned, we have the Beat Patrol that is downtown. We've had the construction of Harmony Square. The south side has been cleaned up. We now have the YMCA, but there is a human component to this. All the stuff that we've kind of talked about in general have all been tactile. One of the largest concerns we receive is the amount of homelessness, the mental health, the drugs, and addictions that are prevalent in our downtown core. A former police officer and some individuals from St. Leonard's brought a wonderful little idea, and I'm going to explain it as best I can. All the services that we offer for those people are principally within a 10-block radius of downtown. They come there and they congregate, and then they disperse to find places to sleep because they don't have the shelters for the homelessness. What these officers, or former officer and members, kind of suggesting was, why aren't we relocating the services outside of the downtown core? And we're not talking about in other residential areas, but rather looking at some place that has a low commercial turnout or a high industrial component. For example, the former Westcast building would have been a great location where you could have created a treatment center with multiple floors for services for those people who are suffering from addictions, using the warehousing to create secondary housing for these people who are vulnerable, who need a safe place, and integrate them back into programs for employment opportunities. If we take the services and deliver that to them and move those services, people will tend to follow that. Otherwise, everything that we do is downtown, and it's an attraction. It's kind of like putting a bowl of chips on your coffee table and watching a sports game or a movie. Where do you tend to go? You tend to go to where the chips are and sit and relax. Well, this is kind of what's happening right now, and it's a very important process. I want to be able to take the city and the county through social services and handle that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel, same question to you.
Well, I think trying to get the homeless and the ill people off the streets has to be number one. Now, right now, we have to pay police, courts, judges, social workers to take care of them. That's a lot of money to take care of these people who are on the streets because they're broke. Now, if we could give them an interest-free credit card so that the money we would be spending on cops and judges and stuff they could use to rent an apartment somewhere, that would get them off the streets. Also, if they could buy some food with their credit cards, then we ask them, look, if you get a chance, try and pay it back. Even if you don't pay it back, it's cheaper doing this, letting you buy your own food and get your own apartment, than us having to chase you and follow you and have social workers work on you. So it always comes back to giving them a new kind of money. Alternate currency would work fine if the landlords would take a part of their rent in that alternate currency because they can pay a part of their taxes in that alternate currency. All we have to do is accept our own Brantford bucks in our taxes, and then we can use our own Brantford bucks to finance people to get off the streets. Then we don't need cops chasing them, social service, and all these people trying to take care of them. So it always comes back to lack of money, and an alternate currency always fixes those kind of problems.
Thank you. Next question.
The City of Brantford is a nearly $250 million corporation. and as mayor, you hold a unique role as the chair of a council of 11, elected to govern and lead our city. So tell us about yourself. What makes you uniquely qualified and the best person for the job, and why do you want to be mayor?
Mr. Smith, it's your turn to start first.
This basically is going to be recapping my closing statement and very much my opening statement. Personality and the compassion that you need to deal with the people in the city of all aspects of life, whether it's low income, below the poverty line, way above the poverty line. The personality and the person you are is much more important than knowing the job or your background, whether it be, lawyer, politician, life, whatever. I know as mayor, it's not the be-all, end-all. I never aspired to be a politician. I saw many problems that were going unaddressed, that were going, in my opinion, and the opinion of many people I've spoken with, being addressed poorly or favoring the wrong people, much for personal gain. That's not my goal. I know with the Council of 11 and myself, I would hope to redirect the thought process towards the city and the community as a whole. Not necessarily for those most fortunate now, not for personal gain, not for any other aspect other than to rebuild the city to what it once was and to what it can be very easily, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robell.
Thank you very much. What makes me the best possible candidate for mayor for the city of Brantford? I think let's start with who I am. I'm a fourth generation, so I'm very much in touch with this community, the members of this community, and the sensitivity that comes with this community. I've worked here, as I said in my introductions. I've grown up here, I've served in the council on here, and I've been elected 3 times to do that. I've gained the political experience. I've even been a candidate in other elections, provincial and federally, all to gain that experience of understanding how to work and network and build relationships. Part of that also comes with being a good tradesman. For 35 years, I've worked with my hands. I've been a doer, a go-getter, somebody who's very goal-focused, task-oriented, and rewarded once it's completed. That's something who I am and how I go about dealing with things. If we have the ability to have a compassionate, strong hands of a tradesman to be able to pull things together, because this community was built on the backs of the working class, I think that counts for a lot in a time right now when we need to make changes. It's time to sit back and look at who, what, and our education. Now, if somebody's going to say, well, my education is not, well, then I would say 5 years as an apprentice to serve as a journeyman counts for a tremendous amount. But not only that, I also come with an acumen in the business. I served and did a completed 2-year program at Mohawk College in business, so I have that experience. Everything I've done, I've built carefully and strategically to make sure that I am at the best possible position in my life to be Brantford's best mayor for the city, for the residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Trammell.
Well, if you remember Star Trek, Science Officer Spock, he was the guy who could figure out the odds of winning. Well, I have a degree in systems engineering, and I was teaching assistant of Canada's only mathematics and gambling course, so I can figure out the same odds of winning. So I have the closest education to Mr. Spock on the planet. I took out the site smartestmanonearth.ca, smartestman.ca for short. And notice, not one doctor in the world figured out that they had been apple-oranged by who comparing CFR to IFR except me. If that doesn't prove I'm a lot smarter than everybody else, what does? Did you know that in Ukraine, Canada fought against the Ukraine Nazis with the commies back in the Second World War, and now we're fighting with the Nazis against the Russians in this war here? Can you believe that? And finally, everybody's been told that raising interest rates fights inflation. Can you imagine anything as stupid as believing that raising costs are going to lower your prices? And yet everybody does. I'm the only person screaming not true. So, yeah, I'm the smartestmanonearth.ca, smartestman.ca for short, and nobody's going to trick me into getting scammed like you've all been scammed. So, there's 3 great examples of how the wool's been pulled over your eyes and not mine. And I'm proud of it, especially the fact that I spotted them apple oranging us for the lockdowns and the shots, and nobody else did. Not one doctor. Of course, doctors who do will get suspended and fired. Vaccine hesitancy. If you find out that 92% of the people are vaxxed who die and only 85% of the population is vaxxed, you would figure out that you have vaccine hesitancy. So yes, I'm hesitant about vaccines because more people die when they take them than they don't, okay? So there are many other things at my site, smartestman.ca. You can go check out my bio, all the other things where the world got it wrong and I got it right.
Thank you. And Mr. Davis, same question to you.
Yeah, so Brantford's been my home almost all my adult life. It's where I built my career as a lawyer, where I've raised a family. And during all those years, I've always tried to give back to this city that I've truly grown to love. I've been involved in a number of organizations, working with other people to help those in need, to help our educational system, to help economic development. I've done that through extensive involvement in the Brant United Way and leading the campaign for 1 year. I've done that by leading one of the local Rotary clubs. I've also been involved in Mohawk College Board of Governors. I've been a past president of the Chamber of Commerce. I've been involved in the Economic Development Board. I've been the chair of the Brantford Aquatic Club, the Swim Club. So I've been involved in almost every aspect of our community. And throughout it all, my goal has been to do what is right, to do what is going to benefit our community and the people in our community. And so I decided to take that knowledge, and that's why I ran for council 4 years ago. In terms of my ability as a lawyer, what you do as a lawyer basically comes down to this. You solve people's problems. You're a problem solver. And so some of those skills I can take and I have been using at council, at the city, to solve problems for the city. And that's very much what I'm orientated to. Looking at what are the challenges, what are the opportunities our city has in front of it? What do we have to do strategically to take advantage of those opportunities, to capitalize on those opportunities, and also to deal with the risks that are there, no matter what it may be. I've also taken a real interest in how the city operates and how the administration of the city operates, how to make it more efficient, more effective. And that's something that takes a long time to learn as a mayor. Actually, the first 2 to 3 years, you're actually learning. You're understanding the system, understanding the process, understanding your community. And it's really in the second 4-year term that you're able to really make good use of that for your community.
Thank you. Carrying on one of the themes we discussed earlier, the city of Brantford's success is closely tied to that success of our neighbors, the county of Brant, and increasingly 6 nations of the Grand River. We share boundaries and land use opportunities with both these communities, and we've had some success sharing resources. There's much more that could be done. What are 2 key and substantive areas of services that you believe could be improved upon by partnering with our neighbors in the county and or the 6 nations of the Grand River? And we'll start with you, Mr. Robell.
Perfect. 2 key areas, transportation and industry. So let's expand on the transportation component. Because we have the Garden Ave, County Road 18, up to Rest Acres Road, this comes in very close proximity to lands owned or covenant by 6 nations and Mississauga, Mississauga New Credit. Those types of partnerships are going to have to be with the city, the county, and First Nations people. Those types of projects, creating that infrastructure, is very valuable. Part of that also intertwines with how we deal with commerce, and that's the industry. If we create the transportation, doesn't mean that industry is going to come, just means we have a means of providing it, a transportation to get it to and from our communities more efficiently and effectively. When we come to industry and development, we're looking at ways to solve some of our problems, such as affordable housing, increased costs that are coming down the pipeline to our community. We need to start building an effective business plan up front, not just selectively targeting one piece of property or another. We need to actually start looking at all of our assets, determining which ones have community value, take those off the plate, then start looking at ones that have good high value, that are assessed and appraised by the Appraisal Institute of Canada, or at least a recommended member for it. Then we start selecting, and I'm going to use straight up the airport as a good example. When we talk about the airport, we talk about Mohawk Greenwich, and we talk about Northern Globe properties. They could have all been looked at, determined with highest, best possible use, asset use, valuated, and then the public gets a chance to have that consultation both with the city, the county, and Six Nations, and look at the partnerships we can have in the airport. Maybe one of those ones where we have the opportunity to value those lands, sell those lands, and create an incredible working relationship with all three communities for industry and growth development for our community. That's employment opportunity at the same time.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel.
Well, I could show our neighbors how to set up a Let's Time Bank barter network so that they could trade with us and we could trade with them. And we could buy more of their stuff because we could use our alternate currency as well as cash. And they could buy more of our stuff because they can use alternate currency and cash. So showing them how to get involved and setting up their own Let's Time Bank database would be a way to do more trade with them, more barter with them, and more neighborly stuff with them.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, on shared resources.
Yeah, shared resource. I've talked previously about the Six Nations and new credits. So now I'll talk about the county in a little more detail. So I think we're really turning the corner in our relationship with the county. If you go back 6 years, the boundary negotiations, those lands north of Power Line Road, that left a lot of kind of bitterness and divisiveness because it was really much we win and you lose type of negotiation. Since then, these two councils, working with some great staff, we've been trying to find ways we can work with one another for the betterment and of all of the residents in this region, trying to find what are called win-win solutions. We found it with social services, which is in charge of general welfare. It's also in charge of daycare. It's also in charge of housing, done for the entire region, both the county and the city. And we struck earlier this spring, with the approval of both councils, a pretty revolutionary agreement where it's now a true joint 50-50 partnership. In fact, this past week we actually jointly passed the budget for that department. The first time in history we've done that, even though previously it was still operated by the city for the county, but it was treated with the county was treated in the past as kind of a junior partner. Now they're full partners. I think it's established a goodwill, a basis of goodwill. We can now move forward to deal with some other regionally pressing issues. Interregional transportation, certainly that's one. Another one is how we manage our waste, both in terms of the organics that have to come in and also landfill site capacity. There's the whole issue of how we're going to service the industrial lands that the county has adjacent to the city and how we have north of Power Line Road. And there's much we can do together to deliver those services more efficiently, more cost effectively, and more effectively for the residents. And as I said, I think the goodwill is there. I think we're turning the corner. I'm very optimistic what we can accomplish over the next 4 years.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Two big key things that I would want to focus on with the surrounding areas and the surrounding cities would be quicker fire, police, and EMS response, especially with the way downtown is now. As Mr. Robell stated, we have a high addiction, we have mental health problems, we have many other health issues that are not necessarily going addressed properly, and even when they are addressed, we don't have the opportunity to address enough of it. We can work with surrounding areas to help address those issues. We can help even smaller things with snow removal. We all deal with it every single winter. The main two roads, Colborne and Dalhousie, are cleared, and it takes days, if not more, for side streets to get. If we can rely on outer cities, the smaller cities that have access to some of our main streets, we could help give access to snow removal. But basically, just in general, it would be focusing on the little things like fire, police, EMS, snow removal, and social help for whether it's addiction, rehab, and mental health.
Thank you. Greg.
Candidates on housing affordability. One of the most challenging problems at all levels of government right now, as you probably know, is the cost of housing. So two parts. What are your plans to address housing affordability in Brantford? And what can the city do to support the development of more homes that are affordable to the average resident?
Mr. Trammell?
Whoa, affordability. Geez, that seems to be what I'm talking about all the time. Now, if the residents had access to alternate currency, they could pay a little more for rent. They could afford their rent. Therefore, the rents would be more affordable. As well as if they got children, kids. Do you remember 2 elections ago I was talking about bus bucks? About using bus tickets to pay students to shovel the snow in the winter? I mean, imagine a big snowstorm and you got a gang of students out front shoveling the snow and they're getting bus tickets on the empty buses to pay them for it. Now, it never got done. I mean, they started in Japan, a bucks idea, but not here. And so anyway, the same idea. You can use an alternate currency, bus tickets, to pay kids to do useful stuff, cleaning the parks, shoveling the snow, and that gives the families more money to pay rent in this affordable housing if the housing authorities take bus bucks and take alternate currency for the rent. So, same idea, bus bucks, less time bank credits, alternate currency always solves the problem of unaffordability.
Thank you, Mr. Trammell. Mr. Davis?
Yeah, the last 8 weeks I've been throughout the city on people's doorsteps, and what I've heard fairly frequently, particularly from parents, they're very concerned about whether their children will ever be able to afford to buy a home here in Brantford. Shocked by the run-up in prices. I'm shocked by those run-up in prices. They have moderated a little bit, but it is shocking. And so what is behind that? It's very much a supply. More people want housing units, young families, than the available units. So what I have been focusing on and what council's been focusing on and what I like to focus on in the future is how do you add to the supply of housing? You have to build more, you have to build faster. In fact, we're doing that right now. We very much streamlined the process by which a builder gets a building permit. And we streamline it so they spend less time doing the paperwork and more time doing the things that they do right, which is build. The other thing that we've been doing is focusing on the boundary land, because part of the problem we have is not enough land to build on. And we have a very active program to bring in the infrastructure for that particular area. And we also have programs to facilitate and encourage the building of rental buildings, both in development charges and also in a tax credit program. The end result is you're going to see more rental units, both market and affordable and subsidized. If you combine that with the Mayor's Housing Task Force plan, and that's kind of separate. I just finished talking about private housing for young families. But there is a need for seniors who are retiring. They need rental housing. And that's why we've developed a program that encourages builders to build rental housing. And then you have the people that are in the greatest need. They can't afford market rent. And we have a very active plan to build 1,000 units over 10 years. We've done approximately 60 so far. We're going to be doing hundreds more over the next several years. That is an active plan to deal with the housing crisis.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
I personally have been affected by the housing crisis. There's clearly a housing crisis. Nobody's disputing that. Availability is likely a big issue, but the pricing themselves is, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems. I sold my house back in December. We sold it to, it ended up being an out-of-town buyer. We focused on selling to a family. I've heard too many stories of houses, single-family homes being bought out by basically conglomerates or companies in the Toronto area and the surrounding area to be split up into rental units that are way overpriced. They're priced way even higher than Toronto pricing, let alone Brantford. We have to focus on trying to eliminate the house sales to big corporations. We have to try to allow that access to families and single income families, even students. Personally, I have friends that have had to try to get 3 or 4 or 5 of them into one rental unit, and they were still denied because it wasn't, because they didn't have enough income between five university students. Please, excuse my stutter. The focus, in my opinion, is just wrong. We've focused on high-income condos and housing, and developing Arrowdale to be this new thing to fund low income. We should just be focusing on funding the low income and the geared to income housing directly instead of building for the future. Thank you.
Mr. Robell.
Thank you very much. Great question. Requires a lot of thought, a lot of planning. I think there's some things we need to address. One, Bill 109, it's the intensification and how we go about intensifying our neighborhoods. We need to be aware of the transportation impacts that these happen. Now, there are some great local builders and developers, small, that are doing things like garden suites where they're utilizing maximum space. This creates a rental property that may or may not be affordable depending on where the people are with regards to their income status. But I think the question also reads out about affordable housing and housing that's affordable. So let's talk about housing that's affordable for people. If you build more and you build faster, you can't build them cheaper and sell them cheaper because the market dictates how much you're going to sell. For example, if you look at the homes that are being developed in West Brantford, these are 2,400 square foot plus homes. They're priced in excess of $800,000 and up. These aren't affordable to the average first-time buyer. We need to find ways to make projects and scale them down, but still provide good quality product. And this is why I want to reach out to the Brantford Home Builders Association and create an organization with a Made in Brantford solution. It's going to require council, county, Six Nations, our builders and developers and tradespeople to pull that together. If we're going to talk about retiring seniors, we want to be able to keep our seniors in their own homes for as long as we possibly can. That cuts down on the potential need for, I need more rental properties. We need to focus on the people that are on that list. How do we do that? Well, we can't do it by selling assets. We have to look at either taxes, fees, debentures, federal profit, or, well, I said selling assets. One of them has got to pay for a $300 million projected debt in the next 10 years. I believe we have an opportunity to examine it holistically as a council by looking at all of our assets, looking at all of the options, talking with the community and engaging the community to come up with a proper and effective solution. Fair enough. I think that's great. Look forward to having a greater debate on it in the future. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Continuing on with the theme of affordability and housing, in January of this year, the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force released a report with a number of recommendations to improve access to housing that is affordable to all Ontarians. What aspects of that report in particular are most promising to you, and what aspects, if implemented, would be challenging? For example, municipal land transfer tax and housing as a right encourage more densification. What specific aspects of this report are, again, opportunities, and what would be challenging? And we'll start with you, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, the report contains about 65 recommendations, and much of it, I think, almost everyone supports because some of it is designed to kind of streamline the building permit process so that building projects, no matter what type they are moving through the system faster and the builders can build faster. However, some of what is in that housing plan, I believe, is really designed and orientated towards the GTA and to those communities that have an LRT transit hub or a subway hub. And that is, what I'm talking about is allowing for intensification in single-family residential areas, fourplexes in single-family areas. You know, and currently you can do duplexes in single-family residential areas. So walking through the city, I've seen the impact of that. I can remember what a street was like 4 years ago, and I'm seeing it now. Some streets have had this intensification happening to them. And it does actually change the neighborhood. It results in more parking. It results in people living on the street who may not be as invested in the neighborhood as owners. And so I certainly would not support the further intensification of single-family residential areas. But there is much else in that report that I think is worth supporting, and I have no doubt will lead to more housing, more affordable housing, more attainable housing being constructed in Ontario. For example, if when you deal with how developers finance the obligations they have to the city, much in that report suggests more innovative ways to do that so that the field is more open and accessible to smaller builders. And I think that's a great idea, to increase the number of smaller independent builders, and some of what is in there does that. So, long and short, I can support much of it, but that which I think really has an impact on the character of neighborhoods, I'm not in support of.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, on what measures could be promising in addressing housing affordability and what aspects would be challenging to incorporate?
As much as I hate to say it, unfortunately, I never had a chance to actually look at that report. I did hear about it, but I just didn't have the opportunity to read through it, so I won't be able to comment directly on that report. Most of my campaign has been focused on other aspects, and affordability of housing is definitely going to be one of the things I want to focus on, but not my top three, so I haven't had a chance to actually look at the report, so I can't really comment on that. As stated in the last question, though, I would definitely want to try to find a way to gear towards, as Mr. Robell stated, not necessarily the $800,000 and the $1 million homes, but the smaller, more affordable homes. It may be smaller, but if it's affordable for a family, whether it's single income or dual income, it's much more beneficial to the city to have that family here than to have a company from out of town owning it and overcharging for rent. Again, for the report, I can't really comment, unfortunately. Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Robell, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think this is a great opportunity to look at the report, glean through it, take some of its key points out of it, and create a made in Brantford solution. We have the trades, we have the resources, we have the business acumen, we have the community sensitivity. We have somebody that understands all of those aspects right here as a candidate. This has been my area of field for over 35 years. We talk about infill, intensification, urban sprawl, and services. They are all impacts on how we do and grow in our municipality. Remember, we're not building with large developers if we take a made in Brantford solution. We're looking here locally. If we look at large development, such as out in the West Brant, these are Toronto developers, large corporate developers that are building at a rush pace, high cost, and it makes it very difficult for our market, if you will, to directly compete with that because they have that capital up front. What I am suggesting is we look for those available spaces where we can encourage our own local developers to do that. And I want to be careful about infill and intensification, because if we do it the wrong way, we start to have an influx on our community, i.e. transportation, parking. The streetscape becomes very different. We need to look at areas where it's more suitable, where it's more desirable. We need to have those communications with the neighbors up front and set those standards in a policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel.
2 questions ago, the mayor mentioned a tax credit program. And asked this question, he said, and looking for innovative ideas. The only thing wrong with a tax credit program is what's a guy going to do with a $1,000 tax credit? Now, if you printed up a whole bunch of $10 tax credits and paid the builder with them, he could use them to pay some employees. He could use them in the stores. In other words, paper tax credits in small denominations would be an ideal alternative currency. They've been used in different cultures in the past, tax credit notes, so that would be a great innovative idea to print up a whole bunch of small tax credit notes so that they can use them as currency out in the community. So that's a great idea, a tax credit program with paper tax credits, small denominations. Innovative.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, do you have a rebuttal?
I complimented him. What does he need a rebuttal for?
Yeah, no rebuttal.
No rebuttal. Okay, next question.
Brantford's home to the Woodland Cultural Centre, a former residential school. First of all, have you read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action? And secondly, what additional steps should the city take towards reconciliation with our Indigenous communities?
And Mr. Smith, we'll start with you.
As I've stated many times before, open and honest communication is the big one. Sorry, my apologies. Many people that I've spoken with of the Indigenous community feel that they are being unheard, not listened to, and even if it is heard, or they are given the time to voice their opinion, it's swept under the rug or ignored for the most part. What happened at the Rouse schools is an absolute tragedy, and it's not something that can ever be rectified in any way, shape, or form. We can only move forward trying to do our best to rebuild from problems in the past. And the only way to do that is with proper communication, honesty, and trust building from here on out. As for the Woodland Community Center, that's something that we should talk directly with the community center, the Six Nations representatives, and basically all of Six Nations to move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robell.
Great question. Truth and Reconciliation document, if my memory serves me correct, is somewhere between 96 and 100 key points. 42 of them have a direct link to our federal and provincial government, and 24 of those 42 tie into the municipality and things that we can possibly do. Land transfer tax request to the province, asking for an increase and then transferring those funds over to Six Nations or to the province to disperse to Six Nations, doesn't solve the problem within the course outlines of those 24 points. This is about recognizing their culture, the sensitivity to their culture, the sovereignty to their culture, and atonement for the past. If we're going to be able to do that, then we need to actually have an open dialogue, not only with Band Council, because we're legislatively required to do that under the Indian Act, but we're also having, I believe, what we call a moral and ethical obligation to actually sit down and have a conversation with the Mohawk people, the Loyalist Mohawks, and the 5 other nations that are part of Six Nations. It's a very difficult task to deal with because there's so many tight little intricacies we have to work through. It needs to be done. It's going to take somebody who's very open, very transparent. It's going to take a democratic process. It's going to take somebody who's willing to be quiet and listen and not provide their input, because that's part of their culture. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to have that conversation and find a solution to move forward. I believe I'm the right type of person to be able to address that for this community. I have the sensitivity, I have the acumen, and I have that passionate skill set to look forward to working with Six Nations. And it's part of it also ties in with working with the county and Six Nations as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel on Indigenous relations.
Well, nothing builds relationships better than trade. Now, in the old days, natives used to have wampum. Wampum was the native money. A native could paint a bead worth a beaver pelt, a horse or something. Then he could go travel around and pay people with these wampum beads. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll take your wampum if you take our wampum. So wampum was a great alternative currency that worked in North America hundreds of years ago. Now, why they gave up their wampum and got onto bank monies where they could pay interest to the whitey, I don't know. But they had a perfect money system of their own. They've lost it. I'd say get back to your wampum again, because I'll take your wampum if you'll take mine.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, over to you.
Yeah, the Truth and Reconciliation report, especially meaningful for us here in Brantford, because of course there was a residential school here, one of the one that has the longest history. And when you read the report and you read the experience of those who's gone through it, like it's shocking. It, in essence, was trying to eradicate a culture and a cultural background. And so the reconciliation recommendations that are contained in the Truth and Reconciliation report, we've read them, we've reviewed them at the city, and we're trying to make a really concerted, genuine effort to capture the spirit of the Truth and Reconciliation report. So what are some of the things we're doing? Well, one, hiring the Indigenous Affairs Advisor. This is a person who has direct connections to Six Nations to provide us with advice. We've done that. We've increased the degree of cooperation at the staff level between the elected council staff and city staff. There's sensitivity training for our staff. They often do joint seminars together. They just recently did a joint experience on the Six Nations. A large component of that is supporting the Secretariat. The Secretariat is overseeing the search for the missing children. And we've been working very closely with the Secretariat to assist the Secretariat in that search. In fact, I was at the Reserve 2 weeks ago where they made an announcement as to the new executive director. We've also done things that are symbolically significant. For example, you've probably seen the bus that has the orange-colored logos that are in support of the Secretariat and the search for the children. Other things we're trying to do is to increase the understanding. If you understand a culture, if you understand the differences, if you understand the history, it's easier to have meaningful communication. And so we are doing a number of initiatives to increase cross-cultural events, increase the amount of interaction between the two communities. Because by working together with Six Nations and, of course, New Credit, we can come to a better accommodation, a better reconciliation.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. This year, the Chamber co-authored a provincial policy paper advocating for a strategy on homelessness, addictions, and mental health. And that policy paper was unanimously accepted as part of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce provincial advocacy priorities for the next 3 years. That same policy paper is sponsoring will be brought forward at the national level, sponsoring a similar resolution this fall, both of which are calling on higher levels of government to recognize and act on the significant issue of homelessness, addictions, and mental health. What actions, then, can the city do to address this challenge in our community, and how prepared are you to address it? And we'll start with you, Mr. Robell.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not familiar with the policy. I'm not familiar with the paper. In fact, I've never been provided a copy of it, even prior to coming here today. However, if we're going to talk about homelessness, drugs and addiction, and mental health, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier about having that soft and gentle, compassionate approach. These are people, you know, and we hear that they're going through challenges, and we don't recognize all of their challenges. We need to have those community services in place, and we do. But there are people out there, and these are good, vulnerable people that don't want anything to do with engagement of, quote, the man, the government, the system. They're running from it or they hide from it. They don't need to be in some safe injection center because they don't want to be identified. This is a very personal issue for a lot of these folks. The vulnerable are very sensitive. Are we going to be able to tackle this? Yes, but we're going to have to do it very collectively, with great compassion. We have to be able to find places and strategies to do this. And I talked about one earlier because we had former police officers and people with mental health and addictions that talked about some of the solutions that we need to do. It's going to require provincial funding. It's going to require federal funding. It's going to require a united front on all three councils, if you will, Six Nations, county, and city. And we're going to have to go and lobby, if you will, the province and the federal government for the additional funding to do with it. This is a strategy that's across all communities, and it's one heck of an impact. Am I prepared to go the distance to help these people out? Absolutely. It's part of who I am. It's part of my life. It's part of my past. I understand the need for recovering from mental health and addictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel.
So lobbying for funding that the government doesn't want to give us. Never worked in the past, won't work now. But giving them alternate currency so they can pay a rent, they can afford a home, they can afford some food, not a luxurious living, just the basic necessities, so we don't have to pay social servants to take care of them. Now, they don't want to be identified, fine, get your own apartment. We don't need your ID. We don't have social servants chasing you anymore. So, giving them their own source of currency so they can live where they want, buy what they want, not luxury again. I'm not saying you can go to the alcohol store. But anyway, again, we're back to the same solution for the homeless and the poor, which is giving them an alternative interest-free credit card and asking someday when you're back on your feet, just try and pay it back. And you got the rest of your life to pay it back. It's not like we're going to chase you every month for the interest. There's no interest. Just do your best, see if you can get out of debt by the time you die. And most people, I think, will. So I'm ready to trust the homeless with a little bit of interest-free debt, social credit, and let them pick their own mode and way of surviving.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, this problem, in particular dealing with substance use, it's a national crisis. It affects almost every family. And really tragic stories. I'm going across the community. Last week I was talking to a mother who lost her 24-year-old son. Talking to CAS officials, they tell me there are some families that lost both parents and the kids are in care because the parents were lost to substance use. But there's hope. We do have a local drug strategy that's been revitalized by the health unit. We have programs that are more resilient and robust, helping young people so they don't fall into that lifestyle. We've beefed up the rehab program specifically through the St. Leonard's Community Association and the Brantford Community Support System. We've expanded the outreach program for people that are on this street. We've had supportive housing, which has on-site counseling, on-site, and that's Marlene Ave down in Eagle Place. We're working very hard. I'm personally involved in trying to develop a drug treatment court so that those who are caught into the legal system have an option, either take the fine or jail or go into a rehab program. There is a very innovative safe supply project that's just about to start here in Brantford. It's a pilot project funded by the federal government, and kudos to the federal government for doing this. But you know what? Underlying it all is the need for better mental health services, and doing that in association with better substance use reform programs. The waiting lists, unfortunately, are longer than they've been in the past, say 10 years ago. And so there clearly is a need, as the chambers have called for increased funding from the federal and provincial governments to expand those programs. We have people and organizations here in Brantford that are willing to do more, but they need to have more resources from the province, particularly when it comes to mental health, which is often an underlying issue with substance use. So, yes, I support the efforts of the Chamber. Clearly, there has to be a greater effort by the higher levels of government.
Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Smith.
Helping the homeless and tackling the growing homeless problem is one of my biggest goals, and one of the biggest reasons that I decided to run this year. Not every homeless person is there because of addiction or mental health. Not every person with mental health problems or addiction problems is homeless. It doesn't have a direct overlap, but there is some overlap. The problem is we've spent too much time focusing on dealing with the homeless problem by basically rousting them from where they are after receiving a complaint, scattering them to the wind, only to have them settle somewhere else and start all over again, wiping our hands and going, problem solved. We've seen it with Love Camp. We've seen it with a few other spots where we've waited and waited and waited until there was a complaint. Then we send the police in, say, all right, move it along, grab your stuff, get out, only to have them settle somewhere else. We have them under billboards at Clarence and Dalhousie. We have them everywhere. We're not solving the problem by sweeping it under a different rug. We have to change things like the methadone clinics. Instead of just being a methadone clinic, show up and get your shot or get your boost, we have to change our standards to focus on helping the situation, helping get off the drugs that they may be addicted to, the alcohol, addressing the mental health issues of the homeless. And then once that step is taken, we should focus on getting those homeless into proper, safe shelters and homes. The two shelters that I know of in town are absolutely disastrously scary. Many people I've spoken with are even afraid to walk inside in the first place. So it doesn't help. We need to change our strategy. It's not working. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg.
So candidates, an extension on the last question, but a little bit more direct. Consumption and treatment services is a complex set of resources and services to address addiction, and it requires community support and federal support to implement. Do you support the implementation of a CTS facility in Brantford? And if so, how would you work with the business community on site selection to address some of the challenges in locating a safe site?
Could you clarify the definition of CTS, or the acronym, please?
Consumption and Treatment Services Center.
Fair enough.
And Mr. Turmel?
Is that for drugs?
Yes.
Okay. Sure. Sure. I mean, I'm in favor of letting people spend their alternate currency on anything they want. I've always said if somebody wants to take 25, 30 years ago, I said if a guy wants to take speed and die in 2 years, I'm not going to stop him. I'll try and talk him out of it, but I'm not going to jail him because he wants to. So I don't want to get in the way of how people's mode and rate of dying, because we're all picking our own poison. We're all finding our own ways to die sooner. And I don't want to get involved in how you do it. But I do want to provide social services if you want help. And that means that you got your own home, you got some credit, you got some food, you got everything you need for a comfortable existence, if not luxurious. And then we just beg, get straight and try and pay us back if you can. And if you don't, we write it off, like in the old potlatch days. Now, if a guy died, what we do is we split, like the Amish, they had these barn raisings. Everybody would chip in to rebuild one barn. Well, if a guy dies, we can all chip in to pay his baby debt, the debt that the guy couldn't pay off, so that we all cover it. And if a guy dies positive, we all get a little bit at the end. So I wouldn't worry about too many guys dying in the negative when there'll be so many more guys dying in the positive. So don't worry about chipping in your dime for having taken care of the homeless drug addict when you're going to be getting a buck for having helped with an interest-free credit card a productive carpenter.
Mr. Davis, over to you.
Yeah, I've toured several. It really is a critical issue because the opioid death rate from overdose is alarmingly high across the country. There have been some improvement in our local numbers, but not good enough. And so the idea behind a safe consumption site is that a user is using in the presence of a medical personnel so that if they overdose, that they're immediately resuscitated. And the theory behind it is if someone has passed, obviously you can't rehabilitate them. And the province insists that they be associated with and have a wide array of rehab and ancillary related programs. So I saw the one in Guelph. The one in Guelph actually works quite well. It's not a standalone. It's actually embedded within a community care clinic. And there are a lot of services that are right there on site so that if a person says to the worker, gee, I'd like to try rehab, they go right down the hallway. And it can be very effective. For that to be done here in Brantford, there has to be a full consultation process mandated by the provincial government. It involves a whole public hearing process. And for me, it would be, if there is a safe consumption site, it would have to have all of those all those services on site. To have a standalone safe consumption site, there are many, many problems. However, the Safe Supply Pilot Project, I think, is probably the more interesting and the more promising treatment option that we're seeing coming out of the federal government. It's quite exciting. What it does, it allows people to have medically prescribed opioid to assist them in making the transition to a full rehab program. Not lifetime, like methadone, but temporary. And the results in Vancouver and in BC and Toronto have been very, very encouraging. People are able to focus on improving their life, dealing with rehab, finding jobs, instead of trying to hustle to get the money for their next fix. That, I suspect, is going to be the better long-term solution.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Smith.
As I stated in the last question, tackling the addiction and the drug problem and the homelessness problem is going to be one of the big focuses of my mayorship. I don't even know if that's a word, but it is now. The problem is, as I stated before, we have lost focus, and we're not even necessarily lost focus. We've been focused in the wrong direction. We've been focused on, for lack of a better word, enabling the addiction by giving easy access to methadone clinics, and not as easy of an access. And I've actually, just out of curiosity, I've walked into two of the methadone clinics that we have here. There may be 2 people on staff. They do not have access to mental health. They do not have access to rehab. They do not have access to anybody aside from basically reviving you if you happen to overdose there. I think that's the wrong approach. We have to give access to everything, and not only just give access that if they want it, but encourage the steps to be taken to improve, to wean yourself off the drugs, to get the rehabilitation and the mental health support that's needed. and not just simply say, here's your shot, I'm here if you need me. The focus is wrong. We have to change our way of thinking again. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Robell.
I think this is an opportunity to look at it as maybe putting the cart before the horse. Sometimes we often wonder to hear that phrase. There's a problem, a cause, and a treatment, and the treatment being part of the solution. What is the problem? Well, it's the availability of drugs and the people that are using them. And while that's a challenge for those people because they've been made so available, it's on the street. You can watch a drug deal go down in a heartbeat right on Colburn Street in Dalhousie, and it's plain and obvious. The cause? Well, that's the suppliers and the drug dealers. And if they're going to go after a solution and looking for the problem, target them. Part of the challenge is our judicial system. And while I say this in fairness because they have their backlog and they have their own challenges, we need to be able to find a way to manage that system, deal with the suppliers, deal with the dealers, and at the same time getting those drugs off the street and finding a way to, if you will, for the lack of a better term, corral that problem. We're able to actually start addressing some solutions. Some of those solutions are treatments because of those centers. I alluded to it earlier about looking for places that we can take individuals who need that care, get them away from our downtown core, get them into those care centers that are much better. And when we have our police on beat and we remove some of those temptations, then we have an ability to work effectively in solutions, treatment, and helping our community improve.
Thank you. We have time for one final question tonight. As the voice of our members, the largest business organizations in the area, the Chamber of Commerce Brantford-Brant frequently hears about the cost of doing business in our community. And we appreciate the efforts of City Council over the years to maintain a focus on one of our signature policies, tax ratio fairness between residential, commercial, and industrial tax ratios. Now, in a post-COVID world in 2023, what do you see will be the key challenges to developing a 2023 municipal budget? And we'll start with you, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, the greatest challenge to the next budget will be inflation. We're going to start to see the impact of inflation on municipal operations this coming year in 2023. The other major impact is the same impact that we've seen over the last 4 years, where standard city operations such as public works, snow clearing, parks, the increase on a citywide basis has been kept at less than 1%. But what's been driving tax increases beyond that is the need to support our first responders. So increased funding for police, paramedics, and also firefighters. And also support to the John Noble Home and the health unit because of the COVID pandemic. So those impacts on the budget, I mean, they're hard to control because you want to help people. You want to make sure people feel safer and are safer. And so it's very difficult when you're dealing with those kinds of budgets, police, fire, paramedics, to say, no, that's going to be too much of an increase and we can't afford it. That is going to drive, again, costs next year. And that's going to be the challenge. How do we provide those services more efficiently? Perhaps it's on a more regional basis. That is going to be the major challenge over the coming several years in the budget. The other thing we've been focusing on is to try and increase the revenues on the revenue side of your municipal budget. One side you got property tax revenue, you got user fees, and not much else. And so we've been trying to find additional revenue to take the load off the property taxpayer. The Grand Bridge energy merger, where we merged with Cambridge North Dumfries, was very much about that. It was to provide more stable rates to people, provide better hydro services, but also to increase the dividends from the merged corporation. I think there are going to be other opportunities if we want to be innovative and think about the future, and the opportunities are there to increase the revenue side of the municipal budget, and that will benefit all property taxpayers.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
I'm going to have to agree with Mr. Davis and say that inflation is going to be the biggest problem in the coming years for pricing for everything going up. But the problem with that is we can't just sit back and say, well, inflation and cost of living and everything else is going up and it's a provincial or a federal problem, there's nothing we can do about it. We can absolutely start small by limiting selling to out of town. So you as Mr. Robell stated earlier, stop using big, large manufacturing and building companies that come in and they slap up $1 million house and then charge $2 for it. They build it quick, they build it fast, they build it cheap because they have the means to do that. But what we're encouraging by doing that is the very few local builders and local electricians and local tradesmen are now having to go to Toronto, go to Mississauga, go out of town to work for these companies just to bring the money back into town, which doesn't happen because they're shopping close to where they work. We have to start focusing more on the people of Brantford, the communities that we have here, and the city as a whole, and stop worrying about growth, stop worrying about expansion, stop worrying about how we can get better, bigger and better, because we're not going to get better if we can't focus on the problems that we have now. We are dealing with the problems poorly. We're not addressing them properly, in my opinion. We're not going to fix them, and by adding 50 to 100 to 200,000 people and thousands and thousands of homes, we're just going to compound that problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robell, on the municipal budget.
Thank you. It's a very complex process, having been through it on many times over 3 terms of council. I think one of the things we need to look at was mentioned by the Chamber was the tax ratio, the percentage between residential and commercial, industrial, and institutional. And in this particular case, let's focus on commercial and industrial. I'd like to see it at about a 60-40 split, but I think that's unrealistic knowing how things are built. The ideal split is about 65% residential, 35% commercial. If you find that balance between the rates, it becomes a positive revenue, because what ends up happening is commercial and industrial have the least amount of burden on our services, where residential has the highest. Right now, we're pushing somewhere between 75 and 25. And why is that? That is because developers, when we do their site plans and we do their development plans, we set aside for commercial and industrial plots, or specifically commercial plots. They don't get developed right away. They come back and they ask, we need to have more houses because of dealing with the housing crisis, so they use that commercial land and they get it rezoned and get the adjustments changed. And all of a sudden, that ratio is now starting to shift to a 75 residential, 25 commercial. We have to decide on our needs versus our wants, and if we're going to increase the rates and the fees, well, increasing the rates and fees is no different than increasing the taxes somewhere down the line. You're going to pay more. And here's a great example. The county charges $15 for a death certificate. The city used to charge $25, and now they've increased that rate to $35. That's just one small example, and that's on the backs of somebody who's deceased and has that profit. But it gets worse. The city is issued $2,500 per death certificate from CPP. They pay out to their provider $1,700, and the city, based on that, receives approximately $800 into their pocket. They're actually profiting from that. And that's not how you profit. You don't profit on the backs of the deceased and the peoples and the families that are grieving. You need to start looking at this process a little more holistic. Look at what we have, look at what we're capable of meeting those needs, and how we're going to do it. And that includes an asset review, that includes a budget review, and that includes annual audits, as well as, sorry, go ahead, I was going to get to it, but running out of time.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel, on the municipal budget.
Yes, inflation, higher prices. If anybody hasn't noticed the prices at the grocery stores and wood and everything gone up a lot, then there's something wrong. It's going to get worse. Now they're going to cut back on food production by getting rid of nitrogen to fight global warming, which stopped 25 years ago, okay? But still, the people keep pushing it. They keep falling for the trick. It's not getting warmer. It's gotten colder. Number 2, fuel is going up. That's going to cost more too. And as the prices go up, they're going to want to raise interest rates to fight inflation, because you've all been told that higher costs mean lower prices, right? So it's a disaster that's about to happen. And what can I say? If we don't deal with the scams that are tricking us, interest doesn't fight inflation, it causes higher prices. Global warming stopped 25 years ago, so we don't need to stop food production like they're doing in Europe and in Belgium to stop, or Netherlands to stop the food production. So they're doing all sorts of stupid stuff to fight useless hoaxes. Okay? Now, smartestman.ca is my site where I go over all of these tricks they've done on you. And if you can sit there and say you really believe that raising interest costs is going to lower your prices, you better go check my site, because there's nothing that stupid you can believe. And they got you believing lots of stupid stuff. Okay?
That is all the time we have for questions. The candidates will now be given an opportunity to make their closing remarks, and I want to remind you that each candidate will be allowed 1 minute for closing remarks. And in reverse order to the opening remarks, the first candidate to speak will be Mr. Smith.
I want to start by thanking the Chamber of Commerce and Rogers and my candidates and the other candidates for giving me this opportunity. It was both nerve-wracking and exciting and enlightening all at once. I chose to run, as I stated earlier, I chose to run because I saw problems that were not being addressed, and I've heard problems that were not being heard. I also chose to run and start my campaign under the Brantford Batman persona and character, because that's been known for more than 7 years in Brantford. Ryan Smith is not known. I'm not a politician. I'm not anybody that most of you have even heard of before I started running here and before I removed the mask. Brantford Batman allowed me to reach every single corner of the city in every single lifestyle. As I've stated a few times here tonight, and as Mr. Robell has stated a few times, open and honest communication with every single aspect of the government and everybody in the city is the absolute biggest key. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I'd like to thank again the Chamber and the viewers for giving us this opportunity to discuss our visions for the future. You know, I've spent the last 4 years working to develop a very strong foundation for this city and this community's future success. And what does that look like? One, it means more opportunities. More opportunities for housing, more opportunities for job, more opportunities for recreational and recreation and cultural interests. It also means a healthier and safer city. We haven't talked about it, but a large part of what we're doing is working towards seeing we have a brand new hospital here in Brantford in the next decade. It's also making Brantford an affordable city. And we touched briefly on that in the last question, but we're working with neighboring municipalities to offer services that are joint and reduce the operating costs. We're streamlining the approval process for new housing, and we're continuing to hunt for efficiencies to make the city more efficient and more efficient for the benefit of the taxpayer. Brantford's a strong, resilient community. I'm asking you to support me for mayor on October 24th this month. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Turmel.
Well, you should visit my site, smartestman.ca, to find out how many ways you've been suckered, okay? Global warming, the C-19 pandemic, lockdowns, and supporting the Nazis in Ukraine, interest fights inflation. Boy, do you people look stupid to fall for this kind of stuff. So you need smartestman.ca looking out for you before you fall for any more stupid stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Turmel. Dave?
Thank you to the
remarks.
Chamber of Commerce and Rogers for providing the venue and the opportunity to address the families of Brantford businesses. Transparency, openness, democracy are paramount. When you circumvent the process, it has a negative impact on trust. When you pat yourself on the back and parade around with accolades, it doesn't negate the fact. Brantford has an opportunity to make a difference in its open and transparency policies. It has an ability to make a better choice. On Monday, October 24th, I ask for your trust and your vote to elect me, Dave Robell, as your next mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again to the candidates for sharing your thoughts with us this evening and for your commitment to the community. I'm sure that tonight's conversation will greatly assist the residents of Brantford in making the very important decision on October 24th. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Please exercise your right to vote online, in advance polls, or on Monday, October 24th in person. Thank you and good night.